It was a bright, sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where life seemed to move slowly and predictably. Children played in the yards, riding bicycles and laughing as their parents chatted over fences. The streets were lined with well-kept homes, neat gardens, and sidewalks where neighbors often greeted each other with friendly waves. On the surface, it seemed like any ordinary day in an ordinary neighborhood, but underneath this calm exterior, tensions were quietly brewing. In one of these houses lived a woman who was known to everyone in the neighborhood as being extremely protective of her family. She was the type of person who paid close attention to every rule in the homeowners association, insisting that everyone follow them to the letter. Many neighbors found her strict nature challenging, but no one could deny that she cared deeply about her home and her family. She had a teenage son, a boy who was growing up in an environment where rules and authority were always emphasized. Over time, he had developed a strong sense of entitlement, believing that he had a right to things simply because he demanded them. He had been influenced by his mother's personality, her focus on control, and her tendency to act quickly when she thought someone had done something wrong. That afternoon, the boy and his mother left their house to go to the local grocery store. The store was busy, filled with families buying groceries, elderly people walking slowly down the aisles, and employees stocking shelves. Everything seemed normal until the boy noticed a man in the produce section who caught his attention. The man was calmly selecting his groceries, moving through the store as though he belonged there just like everyone else. He was a black man, unassuming and polite, with a presence that reflected confidence and calm. For reasons that were never entirely clear, the boy decided he had the right to confront the man. Maybe it was a sense of privilege, maybe it was the influence of his mother's strict ways, or perhaps it was just a moment of teenage arrogance. Whatever the cause, the boy approached the man and demanded that he move aside or hand over the groceries he was selecting. He spoke in a tone that was forceful, demanding, and disrespectful, acting as though his words carried the weight of authority. The man looked at him calmly, without anger or irritation, but the situation had already drawn the attention of others in the store. Bystanders began to notice the confrontation. Some froze, unsure whether to intervene, while others quietly pulled out their phones to record the event. The tension in the air was noticeable, and it became clear that this was not going to be a simple misunderstanding. The boy's behavior was aggressive, and the man's calm demeanor only seemed to frustrate him further. Watching from a distance, the mother grew anxious. She saw her son's confrontation and immediately assumed that he was in the right. She believed the man must have done something wrong, though she had no real idea what had happened. Her mind raced with worry, imagining the worst-case scenario and feeling that it was her duty to protect her child. Acting quickly, she reached for her phone and called the police. She described the situation as she understood it, emphasizing her son's account while portraying the black man as a threat or someone who had behaved inappropriately. Her voice was urgent, filled with a mix of concern and indignation, as she expected the authorities to respond immediately and take her side. What she did not realize at that moment was the true identity of the man her son had confronted. He was not just an ordinary shopper. He was a highly respected police commander in the local force, someone who had served the community for years with professionalism and integrity. He had spent decades building a reputation for fairness, patience, and leadership. His presence in the store was completely ordinary. He was doing his shopping like anyone else, unaware that he was about to become the center of a surprising and public incident. Meanwhile, the call to the authorities went through, and the dispatcher received the mother's report. The dispatcher listened carefully, noting the urgency in her voice, but also noticing the way she described the man. There was an underlying tension in her words, a certainty that the authorities would back her claims. However, the dispatcher also quickly recognized the name of the man involved. Internally, it became clear that this call would not be typical. The protocol required that they respond to the call seriously, but the identity of the individual added an unusual twist to the situation. As the minutes passed, the mother continued to insist on immediate action. She did not take the time to consider whether her assumptions were accurate. She was focused solely on defending her son and ensuring that the man in the store faced consequences for what she believed was inappropriate behavior. The boy, sensing his mother's support, became even more assertive, his earlier confidence reinforced by her belief that he was right. Bystanders remained in the store, some curious, some concerned, and some quietly documenting the event. Their presence added another layer of pressure, though the man at the center of the confrontation remained composed. He had dealt with tense situations before and understood the importance of remaining calm, even when faced with aggression or false assumptions. At this point, the situation in the grocery store had become a small spectacle. Shoppers whispered to one another, employees paused their tasks to observe, and the mother's insistence on calling the police amplified the tension. It was a moment where ordinary life in a quiet neighborhood collided with assumptions, privilege, and a misunderstanding that could have escalated into something much more serious. The boy's demand for the man's groceries, combined with his mother's urgent call to authorities, created a scenario that was ripe for conflict. Yet, the man's calm presence and the attention of witnesses prevented the situation from becoming dangerous. It was a delicate balance, a mix of entitlement, fear, and authority, all playing out in a public space where everyone could see the unfolding drama. By the time law enforcement prepared to respond, the story had already started to take on a life of its own. The mother's narrative, based solely on her son's perspective, was ready to clash with reality. What she did not know was that the man she perceived as a threat was someone with experience in handling tense confrontations, someone who could defuse the situation with patience and authority. This incident, which began as a seemingly ordinary shopping trip, had turned into an event that would capture the attention of neighbors, bystanders, and eventually the broader community. It was a moment that illustrated how quickly assumptions could escalate, how privilege could influence perception, and how important it was to remain calm and factual in the face of conflict. The stage was set for what would become a memorable lesson in awareness, humility, and the unexpected consequences of acting without full knowledge. The mother, convinced she was acting in her son's best interest, was about to discover that life does not always unfold according to our expectations, and that authority and respect are not granted simply because one demands them. In the quiet suburban neighborhood, the calm of a sunny afternoon was now tinged with tension. A single moment, a boy demanding groceries, a mother calling the police, had created a ripple effect that would touch everyone involved. And at the center of it all was a man whose presence, patience, and authority would turn what could have been a confrontation into a lesson in perspective, restraint, and integrity. Even as the incident was still unfolding, it was clear that this was more than a minor misunderstanding. It was a situation that combined human nature, societal assumptions, and the unpredictable consequences of acting on incomplete information. The quiet neighborhood, once a place of routine and predictability, had become a stage for a story that no one would forget anytime soon. By the time the mother had finished her phone call, the police were already starting to respond. She spoke to the dispatcher with urgency, clearly believing that immediate intervention was necessary. In her mind, her son's account of the situation was the absolute truth. She described the man in the store as aggressive and threatening, exaggerating details in her worry and desire to protect her child. To her, it felt like an emergency, one that required authorities to arrive quickly and handle the situation. Meanwhile, the man in the grocery store remained calm. He continued selecting his groceries methodically, seemingly unaffected by the boy's aggressive demands or the mother's frantic phone call. To anyone watching, it was clear that he was composed, polite, and in control. Yet, at the same time, he understood the importance of handling the situation carefully. He knew that any sudden reaction, any sign of anger, could escalate things unnecessarily. He had dealt with tense encounters before, both in his professional life and in everyday situations, and he recognized that patience and restraint were the best tools at his disposal. The store was buzzing with a mix of curiosity and tension. Customers paused their shopping to watch the unfolding situation. Some whispered to their companions about what was happening, while others quietly took out their phones, recording the encounter. Employees watched with concern, unsure whether to intervene or let the situation resolve itself naturally. The boy, feeling the weight of the attention, grew even bolder. He seemed convinced that he had authority in this situation simply because his mother had called the police. His confidence, however, was misplaced. The mother, standing at a short distance from her son, continued to speak into the phone. She repeated her version of events several times, emphasizing her son's perspective while ignoring the calm and composed behavior of the man he had confronted. Her voice was filled with a mix of worry and indignation, reflecting her certainty that she was doing the right thing. At this point, she had no idea that the man her son was confronting was not just any resident, he was a highly respected police commander, known throughout the community for his professionalism and leadership. As the dispatcher listened, they recognized the name of the man involved. Immediately, it became clear that this call was unusual. They had to treat it like any other call, following procedure, but internally, there was a recognition of the irony and potential complications. The dispatcher remained calm and professional, assuring the mother that the police would respond and that the situation would be assessed carefully. She, however, remained insistent, pressing the dispatcher to act quickly. Back in the store, the commander finally spoke to the boy, his voice calm and firm. He explained that the way he was demanding groceries was inappropriate and that no one had the right to treat another person in such a way. He spoke politely but assertively, making it clear that respect was expected in every interaction. The boy, startled by the calm authority in the man's tone, hesitated for a moment but quickly resumed his aggressive stance, believing that his mother's support would outweigh any reasoning from the man. The mother watched closely, still on the phone, and began to feel frustrated. She could see that the man was speaking to her son, but she interpreted it as defensive behavior. In her mind, this only confirmed that the man was guilty of wrongdoing. She did not yet understand that the situation was not as she imagined. Her assumptions, rooted in fear and a desire to protect her child, were clouding her perception of reality. The presence of other shoppers added an unspoken pressure to the situation. Several had already recorded short videos on their phones, capturing the interaction. One employee, standing near the checkout, watched carefully and quietly noted the calmness of the man in the store and the aggressive behavior of the boy. Another customer whispered to a friend about how strange the scene looked, observing the irony of the mother calling the police when her son was clearly the one causing trouble. Meanwhile, the police units were en route. Officers prepared themselves for a routine call, unaware that they were about to arrive in the middle of a situation that had already been recorded and was spreading quickly among those present. The mother continued describing her version of events to the dispatcher, growing more insistent with each passing moment. She could not see the perspective of the man being confronted, and she assumed that her version of reality was the only one that mattered. As the minutes passed, the man continued handling the situation with patience. He understood that escalation was unnecessary, and that remaining calm was the best way to prevent conflict. He spoke clearly, giving instructions in a respectful tone, and ensuring that the boy understood the consequences of his behavior. Despite the boy's insistence and the mother's panic, the man did not raise his voice or display anger. Instead, he used a combination of calm reasoning and authority, demonstrating a level of professionalism that the mother and her son had not anticipated. Bystanders, now fully engaged, began murmuring among themselves. Some whispered about the irony of the situation, noting that the boy was demanding something that belonged to someone else and that his mother's actions were only making the scene more tense. Others remained silent, simply observing, but the tension in the air was palpable. The mother, completely absorbed in her own narrative, did not notice the growing attention or the judgmental looks from nearby shoppers. When the first officers arrived, they were immediately briefed by the dispatcher on the mother's report. The description was urgent and filled with concern, painting a picture of a potential threat in the store. However, as the officers approached, they quickly realized that the situation was far from what had been reported. The man at the center of the interaction remained calm, and witnesses including store employees and other shoppers confirmed his account. The boy's behavior, on the other hand, was clearly aggressive and inappropriate. The mother, seeing the officers arrive, expected them to side with her. She began explaining her version of events again, emphasizing her son's role and portraying the man as the aggressor. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and assessing the situation. It became increasingly clear that the mother's assumptions were not accurate, and that the man she believed had caused the problem was actually the one maintaining calm and order. As the officers spoke to the man, they were immediately aware of his identity. Recognition spread quickly among the responding officers, as they realized they were dealing with a high-ranking police commander. This added an additional layer of complexity to the situation, but the man's composure and professionalism made the interaction straightforward. He explained calmly what had happened, and the officers could see that the situation had been misrepresented by the mother's urgent phone call. The mother began to sense that something was not quite right. The calm authority in the man's voice, the confirmation from bystanders, and the careful assessment by the officers all contradicted the story she had been telling. Her son, sensing the shift in attention, grew more defensive, but even he could not match the calm confidence of the man he had confronted. In that moment, the dynamics of power became clear. Authority and respect were not determined by who called the police first or who made the loudest complaint. Instead, they were demonstrated through behavior, patience, and the ability to handle tense situations without escalating them. The man had done exactly that, maintaining control while the boy and his mother had acted on assumptions, fear, and a sense of entitlement. Witnesses continued to record the interaction, noting the irony of the situation. The mother, who had expected immediate validation from authorities, was now confronted with a reality that contradicted her narrative. Her insistence, her urgency, and her assumptions had led to public scrutiny and the attention of professional law enforcement. The situation in the grocery store, which had started as a simple misunderstanding, had grown into a lesson about patience, respect, and the dangers of acting without full knowledge. The mother, while still trying to justify her actions, was beginning to understand that her assumptions had been wrong. The boy, confronted with calm authority, began to realize that entitlement and aggression do not create respect. By the time the situation began to settle, it was clear to everyone present that the man had handled the incident with professionalism and grace. His calm demeanor, clear communication, and ability to de-escalate tension had prevented a minor confrontation from turning into something far worse. The mother and her son, on the other hand, were left to reflect on the consequences of their actions and assumptions. In the quiet suburban neighborhood, life continued, but the events of that afternoon would not be forgotten. The mother's urgent call to authorities, based on assumptions and fear, had created an unexpected spectacle. The boy's aggressive demands had exposed his lack of understanding of respect and boundaries. And the man, a police commander and respected community figure, had demonstrated how true authority is exercised, through patience, calm, and integrity. The grocery store, once a place of routine shopping, had become a stage for a story that highlighted the importance of perspective, awareness, and humility. It was a moment that reminded everyone present and soon, the wider community, that assumptions can lead to misunderstandings, and that acting on incomplete knowledge can have consequences far beyond what is imagined. After the initial tension began to subside, the grocery store slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Shoppers resumed their routines, employees returned to restocking shelves, and the faint buzz of conversation replaced the uneasy silence that had filled the aisles. Yet, the energy of the previous confrontation still lingered in the air. People whispered to one another about what had just happened, comparing the stories they had witnessed. Some expressed shock that such an event could occur in a quiet neighborhood, others shook their heads at the mother's actions and the boy's behavior. The encounter had left a mark, a reminder that even in the most ordinary places, unexpected drama could unfold. The police officers who had arrived stayed for a few more minutes, ensuring that the situation was fully under control. They spoke privately with the man who had been confronted, thanking him for his patience and professionalism. His calm demeanor throughout the incident had prevented what could have easily become a public altercation. The officers also approached the boy and his mother, speaking carefully to ensure that everyone understood what had occurred. They explained the importance of respecting others, remaining calm, and not jumping to conclusions based on assumptions. The mother, though still defensive, was beginning to realize that the reality of the situation did not match her version of events. She struggled to accept that her assumptions and urgency had been misplaced. Her worry for her son had driven her to act quickly, but in doing so, she had misread the entire encounter. The boy, sensing the shift in authority and attention, became quieter, his earlier confidence fading. He had learned an uncomfortable truth, that demanding something from someone else, especially in an aggressive way, did not command respect or authority. Meanwhile, the man calmly collected his groceries and prepared to leave. He moved through the store with the same composed demeanor that had characterized the entire encounter. Though he had been confronted unfairly, he did not display anger, frustration, or resentment. Instead, he chose to let the situation serve as a lesson for those involved, demonstrating how patience, professionalism, and integrity could resolve even the most tense encounters. His actions quietly commanded respect from everyone present, including the mother and her son, though they were reluctant to admit it at the time. As they walked toward the checkout, the mother continued to mumble justifications for her actions, trying to explain why she had felt it was necessary to call the police. She insisted that her son had been threatened, even as evidence and witnesses suggested otherwise. The boy followed behind, glancing nervously at the shoppers who had witnessed the event. Though he wanted to maintain a sense of authority, he could no longer ignore the reality that he had acted inappropriately. The embarrassment of the moment began to settle in, marking a turning point in his understanding of respect, boundaries, and consequences. The store employees, now fully aware of what had transpired, exchanged glances and quietly discussed the incident. Many of them had seen confrontations before, but this one stood out because of the unusual dynamics involved. A high-ranking police commander had been treated unfairly, yet handled the situation with grace. The boy and his mother had acted impulsively, creating unnecessary tension in a place that was normally peaceful. It was a situation that reminded everyone present of the importance of patience, observation, and the dangers of acting without full understanding. Outside the store, neighbors and passers-by began to notice the lingering presence of some of the individuals involved. Whispers traveled quickly through the community, with people recounting the story in different versions, each adding small details that reflected their perspective. Social media, always alert to unusual local events, began to see posts about the incident. Short videos recorded by bystanders started circulating, showing the boy demanding groceries, the mother on the phone, and the calm, composed demeanor of the man at the center of it all. The story, once confined to the aisles of the grocery store, began to spread, capturing attention well beyond the neighborhood. Back in their car, the mother and her son sat quietly. The boy avoided eye contact, still processing the lesson that had been delivered in the most public way possible. He had learned that entitlement and aggression were not acceptable, and that even when one believes they are right, perspective matters. The mother, on the other hand, struggled with mixed emotions. She felt embarrassed that her assumptions had been wrong, frustrated that the situation had unfolded publicly, but also relieved that nothing worse had happened. It was a complex mix of feelings, reflecting both the challenges and the lessons of the day. As the story spread, the man continued his routine, unaffected by the attention. He understood that the encounter was a reflection of human nature, assumptions, and misunderstandings. In his view, the incident was an opportunity to model patience, integrity, and professionalism. He did not seek recognition or praise for what had occurred, he simply acted in accordance with his values, demonstrating how calm and respectful behavior can prevent conflict and teach important lessons. The incident also sparked conversations among neighbors. People discussed the assumptions that had led to the confrontation, the importance of understanding situations fully before acting, and the subtle dynamics of privilege, authority, and respect. Some emphasized how the mother had acted impulsively, while others noted that her concern for her child was understandable, though misplaced. These discussions highlighted the broader implications of the event, showing how everyday interactions could become teachable moments for an entire community. In the days that followed, the story continued to resonate. Social media posts and local discussions kept the narrative alive, allowing people to reflect on what had occurred. Many focused on the calm authority demonstrated by the man, noting how he handled the situation with professionalism and composure. Others examined the behavior of the mother and her son, seeing it as a cautionary tale about acting without full knowledge, letting assumptions drive decisions, and underestimating the consequences of public actions. At home, the boy quietly reflected on what he had learned. The incident was more than just a confrontation over groceries, it was a life lesson about respect, humility, and self-control. He began to understand that asserting authority through aggression or demands was not the same as earning respect. The mother, too, started to re-evaluate her approach to protection and authority, recognizing that her instinct to act immediately could sometimes create more problems than it solved. Through the entire experience, the man remained a model of integrity. His ability to stay calm under pressure, speak clearly, and handle the situation professionally left a lasting impression on everyone involved. He demonstrated that true authority is not about yelling, demanding, or reacting impulsively, but about patience, understanding, and the ability to guide others toward better behavior through example rather than confrontation. The grocery store itself, though back to its normal routine, carried the memory of the incident in subtle ways. Employees who had witnessed the confrontation continued to discuss the lessons they had learned. Shoppers who had been present remembered the calm authority displayed by the man, as well as the impulsive behavior of the boy and his mother. Even small details, such as the reactions of bystanders and the attention from social media, became part of the collective memory of the event. Ultimately, the incident became a story about perspective. It highlighted how quickly assumptions could escalate, how important it was to understand the full context of a situation, and how patience and professionalism could prevent conflict from becoming destructive. The boy and his mother had learned an unforgettable lesson, while the man quietly continued his life, knowing that he had handled the situation in a way that reflected his values and the standards of his profession. The quiet suburban neighborhood, which had been disrupted by a single misunderstanding, gradually returned to normal. Yet, the story left an impression on everyone who had witnessed it or heard about it. It was a reminder that even in the most ordinary settings, human behavior, assumptions, and decisions could create drama, and that handling such moments with patience, respect, and integrity could make all the difference. The boy would carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life, understanding that true respect is earned, not demanded. The mother would reflect on the power of assumptions and the importance of carefully considering a situation before acting. And the man, through his calm and composed response, had taught a lesson that extended far beyond the walls of the grocery store, touching not only those present but also the wider community who learned about the incident afterward. Even though the story started with something as simple as a misunderstanding over groceries, it became a powerful illustration of human nature, the consequences of assumptions, and the importance of integrity. What seemed like a minor event in a quiet neighborhood turned into a story with lessons about respect, patience, and the unexpected ways in which everyday actions can have meaningful consequences. After the grocery store incident, life in the neighborhood slowly settled back into its usual rhythm. Yet, the echoes of that day lingered in the minds of many. Conversations at the local park, in coffee shops, and in schoolyards frequently circled back to the confrontation. People discussed the boy's behavior, the mother's reaction, and the remarkable calm displayed by the man at the center of the event. It became a story that everyone seemed to know, though many had only heard it second-hand. Some told it with a sense of astonishment, others with judgment, but all agreed that it had been a moment worth remembering. The boy, whose demand had triggered the confrontation, could not escape the memory. At home, he replayed the scene in his mind, trying to understand what had gone wrong. He thought about the way he had approached the man, the tone he had used, and the confidence he had displayed, which now felt misplaced. There was an unfamiliar weight of responsibility pressing on him, the kind that comes when a mistake is recognized too late. He began to realize that authority was not something one could claim by force, it had to be earned through respect, patience, and understanding. School became an even more challenging place for the boy after the incident. Rumors had spread quickly, and many classmates knew about what had happened. Some teased him, while others were genuinely curious about the details. He faced questions from friends and strangers alike, forcing him to confront his actions publicly. At first, he responded defensively, insisting that he had only been trying to get what he wanted. But as he heard the same story told from multiple perspectives, he started to see the situation more clearly. He had overstepped, acted impulsively, and failed to consider the other person's dignity. The mother, too, grappled with the fallout of the incident. Her initial embarrassment had gradually shifted into reflection. She thought about how quickly she had reacted, how she had assumed the worst, and how her own stress had influenced the way she handled the situation. She realized that her desire to protect her child had, ironically, put both of them in a more difficult position. The more she reflected, the more she understood the importance of teaching her son patience, empathy, and careful judgment. She recognized that parenting was not only about protection but also about guiding children to understand right from wrong in a thoughtful way. Meanwhile, the man involved continued with his daily life. Despite the attention the incident had received, he remained composed and focused. He understood that his response had made an impression, but he did not seek praise or recognition. For him, the incident was a reminder of the kind of behavior he valued: calmness under pressure, respect for others, and integrity in every interaction. In conversations with colleagues and friends, he spoke modestly about the encounter, emphasizing the importance of teaching lessons through example rather than confrontation. Community members also began reflecting on the broader implications of what had happened. Neighborhood meetings and social gatherings were filled with discussions about assumptions, respect, and communication. People spoke about how quickly misunderstandings could escalate and how essential it was to remain calm and seek understanding before reacting. The incident, while seemingly minor in the grand scheme of things, had sparked a meaningful conversation about human behavior and social responsibility. In the days that followed, the boy attempted to make amends in small ways. He approached classmates who had witnessed the incident and offered apologies, acknowledging that his behavior had been inappropriate. Though some were skeptical at first, they gradually accepted his sincerity. The boy's efforts were not just about regaining respect from others, they were about changing himself, learning to think before acting, and understanding the impact of his actions on those around him. The mother, seeing her son's efforts to improve, began to guide him more thoughtfully. She encouraged discussions about empathy, fairness, and humility. They talked about why it was important to respect others, how assumptions could lead to mistakes, and how handling conflict calmly could prevent escalation. She realized that this incident, though stressful, provided an important opportunity for her son to grow into a more considerate and responsible young man. Meanwhile, the local grocery store continued to serve the community, though the staff remained subtly aware of the previous confrontation. Employees shared lessons they had learned, emphasizing the importance of professionalism and calmness. Many agreed that the incident had changed the way they viewed conflict and service. They understood that people's reactions often came from stress, assumptions, or misunderstandings, and that responding with patience and respect could prevent a small problem from becoming a significant one. The wider community also saw the impact of the incident. Social media posts about the event circulated for weeks, generating discussions about respect, authority, and the way society responds to confrontation. People analyzed the behavior of the mother and her son, debated the ethics of calling the police unnecessarily, and praised the composure of the man who had handled the situation. The story became a teaching tool, shared in classrooms, community meetings, and online forums, illustrating the consequences of impulsive behavior and the value of integrity. For the boy, these lessons were becoming part of his daily life. He approached new situations with greater thoughtfulness, considering the feelings and perspectives of others before acting. He became more aware of the power of words, tone, and body language in shaping interactions. Over time, he gained a deeper understanding of respect not as something demanded or taken, but as something earned through kindness, patience, and understanding. The mother, observing these changes, felt a mix of pride and relief. She realized that, despite the embarrassment and stress of the original incident, her son had gained valuable insight. The situation had provided a tangible example of how actions have consequences and how self-control, empathy, and respect could transform relationships and interactions. She began to see the incident not just as a mistake but as a turning point for her son's development and for her own understanding of how to guide him. As the neighborhood returned to its routine, the incident gradually faded from immediate memory but left lasting impressions. People who had witnessed the event remembered the lessons of patience and professionalism, while others reflected on the dangers of acting on assumptions. The man's calm response remained a benchmark for behavior under pressure, admired and discussed long after the initial confrontation. The boy's transformation, though quieter, became a testament to the potential for growth and learning that even a single incident could provide. Schools incorporated the story into lessons about communication, respect, and decision-making. Teachers used it to illustrate how misunderstandings could escalate and how thoughtful responses could prevent conflict. Students engaged in discussions about empathy, fairness, and authority, using the incident as a case study to examine their own behavior and reactions. The story became a shared reference point, helping young people navigate complex social situations with greater awareness and understanding. Local media also revisited the incident, framing it as a story about learning, growth, and the power of integrity. Articles highlighted the boy's journey toward self-awareness, the mother's efforts to guide him, and the man's exemplary conduct. Experts weighed in on the social dynamics involved, discussing how assumptions, privilege, and communication intersect in everyday interactions. The coverage helped shift the narrative from one of confrontation and embarrassment to one of education and personal development. The man himself continued to demonstrate leadership in both his professional and personal life. Colleagues often cited his handling of the incident as an example of how calm, thoughtful responses could influence outcomes positively. He became a quiet mentor to those around him, showing that integrity and patience were more powerful than aggression or immediate reaction. In the eyes of the community, he represented the ideal of measured, respectful behavior, someone whose actions taught lessons without needing to lecture or demand recognition. For the boy, the experience shaped his future interactions. He became more reflective, asking questions, seeking guidance, and learning to anticipate the effects of his actions on others. Over time, he developed stronger relationships with peers, built on mutual respect rather than fear or dominance. The mother continued to support him, emphasizing the importance of empathy, responsibility, and accountability. Together, they navigated the ongoing challenges of growing up, equipped with lessons learned from an incident that had initially seemed trivial but had proven to be profoundly educational. Even the neighbors who had witnessed the grocery store confrontation noticed changes. They saw the boy behaving more thoughtfully, the mother guiding her child with more patience, and the man continuing to act with quiet dignity. Conversations in the community shifted from gossip to reflection, from criticism to learning. People began to discuss ways to foster understanding, prevent conflict, and support positive behavior, using the incident as a touchstone for broader lessons about social responsibility and human behavior. Ultimately, the grocery store incident became a catalyst for growth, not just for those directly involved but for the wider community. It showed that even a single misunderstanding could have far-reaching effects if handled with thoughtfulness, integrity, and respect. The boy learned humility and self-awareness, the mother learned the importance of guidance and reflection, and the community learned the value of calm, professional behavior in resolving conflicts. What began as a moment of tension and embarrassment evolved into a powerful story of learning and transformation. The lessons of patience, respect, and integrity continued to resonate, demonstrating that human interactions, even in their simplest forms, carry opportunities for growth, understanding, and positive change. Time moved on, and life in the neighborhood continued with its usual routines, yet the grocery store incident remained a quiet undercurrent in the minds of those involved. For the boy, what had once been an embarrassing and frustrating experience gradually became a source of reflection and learning. He often thought about that day, recalling the tension, the confrontation, and the unexpected calmness of the man who had handled the situation so gracefully. With each memory, he understood more about his own behavior and the importance of self-control, patience, and respect. School was no longer the same for him. His peers, once amused or judgmental about the incident, began to notice changes in his behavior. The boy now approached classmates with greater thoughtfulness, listening carefully before speaking and considering how his words and actions might affect others. He realized that strength was not measured by getting what he wanted or asserting dominance but by showing understanding, kindness, and humility. This realization gradually shifted the way his friends viewed him. Some who had been critical before began to respect his maturity and thoughtfulness, while others quietly appreciated his efforts to improve. At home, the mother continued guiding her son through this period of growth. They had long conversations about responsibility, consequences, and the value of empathy. She encouraged him to think about people's perspectives before reacting and to find calm ways to express his feelings. Through these discussions, she also reflected on her own behavior during the incident. She recognized that rushing to judgment and acting out of stress could have unintended consequences, and she committed to setting a better example of patience and understanding for her son. Together, they worked to strengthen their relationship, grounded in communication, trust, and shared learning. The man at the center of the incident quietly continued his life, observing the subtle changes around him. Though he had not sought recognition, he noticed the impact his calm and composed response had had. People in the community often spoke of his behavior as a model of integrity and self-control. Local leaders, educators, and neighbors began to share his approach as an example in discussions about conflict resolution, patience, and respect. He continued to serve the public diligently, demonstrating through action rather than words the importance of thoughtful, ethical behavior. The grocery store itself slowly became a symbol of community learning. Staff members often reflected on the incident when training new employees, emphasizing how calmness, professionalism, and empathy could prevent misunderstandings from escalating. They encouraged one another to remain composed, even in stressful situations, and to treat every customer with dignity and respect. The story of what had happened that day became a teaching tool, highlighting how behavior, both good and bad, could influence others and leave lasting impressions. As weeks turned into months, the boy grew more confident in his ability to navigate social interactions. He discovered that apologizing sincerely and making amends could open doors that had been closed by conflict or misunderstanding. He practiced listening more carefully, speaking with consideration, and acting in ways that reflected integrity. These skills gradually helped him build stronger friendships and positive relationships with peers, teachers, and neighbors. What had begun as a moment of conflict became a foundation for personal growth and improved social awareness. The mother, observing these developments, felt a sense of quiet pride. She realized that the incident, while stressful at the time, had been an opportunity for her family to learn valuable lessons. She began engaging more actively with the community, participating in local meetings and discussions about youth behavior, conflict resolution, and fostering empathy among children. She shared her experiences honestly, hoping that her reflections could help other parents guide their children thoughtfully, emphasizing the importance of teaching patience, respect, and humility. Meanwhile, the community as a whole continued to reflect on the lessons from the incident. Conversations shifted from gossip and judgment to meaningful discussions about behavior, authority, and human interaction. Neighbors began considering how assumptions could lead to unnecessary conflict and how calm, respectful responses could influence outcomes positively. Local schools incorporated the story into lessons on social responsibility, ethics, and communication, helping young people understand the consequences of impulsive behavior and the importance of integrity. The boy also began to engage in small acts of kindness and leadership. He volunteered for community projects, helped classmates in need, and looked for ways to contribute positively to the neighborhood. These actions were not meant to erase the past but to demonstrate a commitment to learning from mistakes and improving himself. Each act of service and thoughtfulness strengthened his understanding of empathy and responsibility, showing him that true character is revealed not in moments of confrontation but in everyday choices. The man who had handled the grocery store confrontation observed these changes with quiet satisfaction. He never sought praise or recognition, but he recognized that the boy was growing into a more thoughtful and considerate individual. He understood that lessons were most powerful when learned through experience rather than lecture, and he continued to embody the values he wished others to see: calmness, respect, and integrity. His example influenced not only the boy but also others in the community who observed and reflected on his behavior. Months later, the neighborhood began to feel a sense of cohesion and shared understanding that had not existed before. Residents, inspired by the story and its lessons, started initiatives to promote positive behavior, empathy, and communication among children and adults alike. Neighborhood meetings included discussions about resolving disputes respectfully, teaching children patience and understanding, and building a supportive community environment. The grocery store incident, once a point of tension and embarrassment, had become a catalyst for meaningful social growth. The boy, reflecting on his journey, realized how far he had come. The impulsive demands, the embarrassment, and the confrontation had taught him lessons that could not have been learned any other way. He had discovered the importance of self-awareness, the impact of his actions on others, and the value of humility and respect. He now approached challenges with a measured response, seeking understanding rather than confrontation, and his relationships reflected this newfound wisdom. The mother, too, saw her role evolve. She became more confident in guiding her son through challenges, understanding that teaching values required patience, reflection, and active engagement. She recognized that mistakes, while uncomfortable, could be powerful tools for learning when approached thoughtfully. Her relationship with her son strengthened as they navigated life together, grounded in mutual respect, reflection, and growth. The grocery store staff continued to use the incident as an example of how professionalism, empathy, and calmness could prevent conflict and create a positive environment. New employees were trained to approach difficult situations with patience and understanding, learning that how they responded could influence not only immediate outcomes but also long-term relationships with customers and the community. As time passed, the neighborhood incident became less of a scandal and more of a story of transformation. People spoke of it not to criticize or gossip but to illustrate lessons about behavior, responsibility, and personal growth. The boy's journey, the mother's reflections, and the man's calm response provided a model for how individuals and communities could turn mistakes into opportunities for learning and improvement. Ultimately, the grocery store incident was remembered not for the embarrassment it caused but for the lessons it taught. It showed that mistakes, conflict, and tension could lead to growth, understanding, and positive change if approached with reflection, patience, and respect. The boy learned humility, empathy, and self-control. The mother learned thoughtful guidance and reflection. the man's example inspired others to act with integrity, and the community learned the power of calmness and respect in fostering harmony. The story remained a quiet but persistent influence in the neighborhood. Whenever conflicts arose, people often remembered the incident and reflected on how they could respond more thoughtfully. Children, inspired by the boy's growth, practiced empathy and careful judgment, while adults worked to model calm and respectful behavior. The grocery store incident became a lasting lesson in human behavior, showing that even small, everyday interactions carried opportunities for learning, transformation, and the development of character. In the end, what began as a single, tense moment evolved into a narrative of growth, learning, and positive change. It demonstrated that integrity, patience, and respect were powerful tools for personal and social development. Every character involved, from the boy to the mother to the man at the center of the story, experienced growth and transformation, leaving a legacy of understanding, empathy, and thoughtful action that would influence the community for years to come.